Hey guys, welcome back to the Learn to Play series from Compass Games. Tonight we're going to be covering Enemy Action Kharkov, a new release from John Butterfield. And being that the base game is a two-player game and then you have the two solitaire games, John is going to cover the basics of the two-player game, giving you all the mechanics and how they work together. This way you have a great foundation to then go on to the solitaire games for both the German and the Soviet sides. So sit back and enjoy and learn how to play the two-player version of Enemy Action Kharkov. Take it away, John.
Okay, thanks, Mo. Hi, I'm John, and what we're looking at here is the game map for the two-player game of Enemy Action Kharkov. The game is published by Compass, and it'll be out in June. And this is the enemy action system. This is the second volume using the enemy action system. The first one is Enemy Action Ardennes. And one of the main concepts of the system is that there's a two-player game and then there's a solo game for each side, really three games in the box. So as Mo mentioned, we're going to be looking at the two-player game this evening and how that works as an introduction to not only enemy action Kharkov, but also the system overall. This game is based on the Third Battle of Kharkov, which took place in early 1943 when the Soviets launched Operation Star and Gallop to break through the German lines in southern Russia and trying to surround large portions and move west. The Germans countered with what's known as von Manstein's backhand blow. So the game has both those aspects, a major Soviet offensive followed by a German counterstroke. So we'll be starting the game at the beginning of the scenario. There are multiple scenarios, but they all start at the beginning of the campaign. And so the board here is actually oriented sideways. North is to the left and south is to the right. The pieces on the board, the orange pieces, the lighter orange and the darker orange, are the two Soviet fronts that participated in the campaign. The Voronezh front are the light orange, and the Southwest front are the darker red orange. And they're facing two German armies, the First Panzer Army, which are the lighter gray, and the Fourth Panzer Army, which are the darker gray. This game has a larger scale than Ardennes. It's at about 10 kilometers to a hex and a time scale of 3 days. So there are some, if you're familiar with Ardennes, there are some rules differences. And if you get Kharkov, there's a section in the rules that explain those differences. But I'm going to assume in this playthrough that you're new to the system. So I've already talked about the pieces a little bit. I'm going to just zoom in and show you what's on some of the units. We have, it's pretty typical. A unit has a attack strength and it has a movement allowance. Actually, it's all combat strength. It's offense and defense and a movement allowance. The small number in the middle at the bottom is only used in the solo games. The units are divisions or regiments, and they're color coded by front and army for the Soviets. So these dark orange are, as I said, the Southwest Front, and then every army has its own color stripe across the top. So there's Mobile Group Popov is one army here, and there's the First Guards Army, and over here is the Sixth Army. The German units are at the army level, at the highest organizational level, and then they are corps. So that's army in the field color and corps in the top stripe. And this is important because in the game you activate units by corps, by German corps, or by Soviet army. And the units are mostly infantry and armored divisions or regiments. Zooming out now to look at the whole board again. As you can see, it's pretty open terrain. There's some woods, there's some broken terrain, a road net primarily for supply, and then cities and towns. And many of the cities and towns are assigned a victory point value, ranging from 1 to 4, Kharkov being the most valuable. And those are Soviet victory points. The Soviet player will be earning victory points over the course of the game. And there's a victory point track over here. The Soviets start with 2 points because they already control two towns that are behind their lines. And they're trying to grab 25 points more to get an instant victory. Also on the board is a turn record track that has the reinforcement units in each turn. then there's a terrain key as well. There are boxes to hold reserve units. Those are units that can come in on the current game turn. So the Soviets have some in this box up here, and at the bottom of the board here, the Germans have some as well from the 1st SS Panzer Corps that may come in based on what cards the players play. So speaking of cards, it is a card-driven game. Each player has a hand of cards that they draw from their draw pile each turn. In the enemy action system, the draw pile is a little bit different every turn. There are certain core cards you always get, so you're guaranteed to be able to activate each of your formations at least once, but then you also get some random cards that make your capabilities a little bit different every turn. And over the course of the game, the cards that are available for your deck change. So in this first turn, the Soviets start with a deck of 13 cards, from which they draw a hand of 5 cards. Every time they have an impulse, they play a card and then will drop their hand size. And the Germans start with only 8 cards in the first turn, so they have to pace themselves. They have a hand of 4 and they can play a card every impulse, but they want to be a little careful because if they play other cards too quickly, the Soviets will get a bunch of turns in the row at the end, which can be a disaster for the Germans. I'll be pulling the cards in from off map and explaining them as I play them. So the game is played, as I mentioned, in impulses. A game turn is going through both draw piles in their entirety until both players have no cards left in their hands or draw piles. But the turn is divided into impulses where the players alternate the opportunity to play a card and activate things. So on your impulse, you're going to play a card. So I'm going to pull the first card. Now, the Soviets go first. And so they want to start with a bang. They're offensive. So they're going to play the card for the 3rd Tank Army. Let me zoom in on that and I'll explain a little bit about the anatomy of a card. So the 3rd Tank Army card can be played for a few different things. When you play the card, you can choose to deploy all 3rd Tank Army reserves. There are none at the moment, so that's not a good option. The second choice the player can declare is to activate all units of 3rd Tank Army. That is what the Soviet player is going to do. There's a third command you can choose, which is to activate any one unit on the map. That you can only do once per game turn, so it's kind of an emergency play if you really need to move just one unit. And then this particular card, later in the game, starting on turn 5, this event becomes available, but we won't explain that now. Now you'll notice that in addition to these commands, there's also a combat tactic the card can be played for, and that's an alternate use. As in many card-driven games, there are different things you can play the card for, and you can, instead of playing this as a command in your impulse, you can play it as a combat tactic to get an advantage in a specific combat. In this case, the card would give the Soviets a partisan advantage in a combat. But the Soviet player is not doing that. They want to play the card to activate the 3rd Tank Army. And that is this group of units here that share the same color. The light blue band across the top indicates the 3rd Tank Army, and the orange field indicates they're part of the Voronezh Front. So the Soviet has activated these units, so now he can move them, and then he can do combats with them. So he wants to try to break through the line with his units. So he's going to attack this guy and this guy, and he's going to move his units first to make those attacks strong. To get strength against this German unit here, it's a division, the 298th Division in the 57th German Corps. They'll be the victim of the first attack. So we're going to move guys over here. The movement allowance of this unit here is 7. So it costs 1 to enter a clear hex. It costs a mechanized unit, which this is, 3 to enter a forest. It costs them 1 additional to cross the stream. Now, at this time of year, these streams are permanently frozen. They don't create any obstacle for infantry movement, but they do slow mechanized units down a little bit. But in any case, this first move is 1, 2. He's going to stack with a unit in a different army, and that's okay, but that unit won't be participating in the attack. And then he's also going to move this guy into here, and he's going to move this guy into here. Now he also wants to attack this guy, so he's going to move other units over here to make that a strong attack. He'll put him here. The stacking limit, by the way, is 3 units or 6 steps. Some units have, like this one, has 3 steps. That's the little black dots, and this one has 2 steps. So when it takes a hit in combat, it flips over to have one less step. So some are eliminated on their second step loss and some on their third step loss. This guy's going to move here. This guy, we're actually going to swap out. We're going to put this guy here and put this guy here. The reason the Soviet is doing that is because he wants to keep this guy who he's not going to attack. He wants to keep him engaged though, because if you're adjacent, your zone of control will make it harder for the other guy to move away. We want to try to trap these guys here. Now the Soviets has finished moving, so now they're going to conduct the first attack. And first they'll attack this guy. That's a regiment of the German Grossdeutschland division in the 48th Panzer Corps. If you're familiar with enemy action, you know that there's no dice and there's no combat results table. Instead, we draw combat chits. And I'm going to be pulling those in a moment to resolve the combat. But to introduce that idea, you're going to be pulling a certain number of combat chits. There's a cup of 60 of them, and you're pulling anywhere from 1 to 10 depending on the size of the combat. And the number drawn is determined by the number of units attacking, and there's a couple other factors as well. So this stack here has 2 units attacking, but one of them is a large unit. That is, it has 3 steps. So a large unit adds 2 chits to the combat. So this stack here will give us 3 chits for this stack, 2 chits for this, and then we're going to attack just with the guy on top here. We want to put the other guy into the attack on the other German unit. And you're allowed to do that. You can, attacking is completely optional. Everyone in the stack can attack, or only one unit in the stack, and the other unit could attack a different place if there's a different adjacent unit, if there's an opportunity to do that. So here we've got 5 units attacking, but that's a total of 6 draws because one of them is a large unit, this guy here. Now, I want to pull out a little bit to show you another reason that the Soviets will get an additional combat chit. And that is this red dotted line here demarks the Soviet artillery barrage zone. In the first 2 game turns, any attack by the Soviets in this area benefits from an additional combat chit draw to represent the massed artillery that they used at the beginning of the offensive. But that artillery was slow, so it won't be advancing as the Soviets advance. It couldn't move at the rate the other units could move. So now we're going to resolve the first attack. We've determined that there will be 7 combat chit draws. The Soviet player has an opportunity also to play additional cards as combat tactics, but they're feeling that this is already a pretty strong attack, so they're not going to do that. The Germans, however, would like to help their Grossdeutschland unit, so they are going to play a precious card from their hand. They're going to play this card here. It could be saved and used to activate German units in the 57th Panzer Corps, but instead, the Germans are going to play it to get artillery into this combat, and that will perhaps help them because in this combat system, there will be chits that give a hit or prevent a hit if you have artillery on your side. So maybe we'll see an example of that. So the Soviets have artillery automatically because of the barrage zone I mentioned, and the Germans are also throwing in artillery in this first attack, so they're having an artillery duel. The Soviets can draw as many as 7. They're not required to, but before they make that choice, you always start by drawing a number of combat chits equal to the number of steps in the defender. Our defending unit has 2 steps, so the combat resolution will begin by drawing 2 combat chits, and I'm going to pull those over here and show you what the first 2 combat chits drawn are. So here you see just below our combat, I've drawn and placed two chits on the map just for visibility purposes. Every combat chit you draw has two sides, and you look at both sides to see if they apply to the combat. So one of these chits says combat engineer. That is a combat tactic that either side could have played, but it was not played. So this combat chit may not apply, but we'll flip it over and look at the back. This says dispersed or unsupplied. If the defender was dispersed, which is a status a unit can have, or is unsupplied, this chit would apply. And if it did, this would be 2 hits against the defender. That's what the D2 means. So this would have been a very powerful chit if the Germans were cut off, but they aren't. So this chit doesn't apply. I'm going to put it over here. Now this chit says equal to or greater than 3-1. So if the odds of the compared strengths is 3-1 or greater in the Soviet favor, this will cause a hit against the defender. The flip side of this says if the odds are less than 2-1, the attacker will take a hit. Let's check our combat ratios and see what the totals are. The Soviets have a lot. They have 9 in this stack. They have 7 more in this stack. That's 16. And they have 4. Remember, only the top unit in this stack is attacking. So they have a strength of 20. The German defender has a strength of 4. So that's an odds of 5-1. So this chit does apply. So at the moment in this combat, the result is 1 hit against the defender. So now the Soviets choose how many more chits they want to draw, up to a total of 7, counting the 2 just played. The Soviet wants to be sure, in this case, to wipe this guy out, or try to. So the Soviet declares they're going to draw 5 more chits. I'm going to pull them all out at once. In play, you draw them one at a time, but I'm going to bring them all out at the same time. So we've determined that this marker here applied. I'll put the ones that don't apply over here, and the ones that apply I'll put in this area. So we're looking at artillery. Ooh, there's an artillery chit. It says attack. If the attacker has artillery, it's a D1. The backside says if the defender has artillery, it's a D-1. Huh. Well, one side has a little red P, which means priority. So in this case, you take the side that has a P. So the attacker artillery applies. So that's another D1. The next chit says 5-1 or greater. And we just calculated that the Soviets have a 5-1 advantage. The flip side of this one says 7-1 or greater. It also says defender not supported, but that's later in the game. Support comes into play for the Soviets. But it's not a 7-1. So we use the other side. So it's a 5-1, but that's also good for the Soviets. Now, the next one says large attack. A Soviet attack is large if 7 or more chits have been drawn. And in this case, exactly 7 were drawn. So it qualifies as a large attack. So this one applies. Checking the flip side of it, if the attack was at 6-1 or greater odds, it would be a D2, but it's not. So the large attack applies. Now, the large attack was a two-edged sword. It's a hit against the attacker and a hit against the defender. So that applies. Now, here's another artillery chit. This one says defender artillery, D-1 with a priority. The flip side is attacker artillery, but in this case, the priority side is the defender. So the Germans did use artillery, so this one applies, and it's a D-1. That will subtract a hit from the Germans. The final chit says only attacker armor. Well, the attacker has armor, but so do the defenders. So that's not the case. And the flip side says only defender armor. But both sides have armor, so this chit does not apply. So we'll put that over there. So we have 5 chits that apply, and we add them up to get the total result. There's a D1, a D1, a D1, and a D1. So that's a D4, but there's a D-1, so that's a D3. And there's an A1. So the net result of this combat is a D3A1. So it's up to the defender to apply the hits against them first. So the German player has to satisfy a D3. You can satisfy a hit by retreating one hex. You, as a defender, you can satisfy a hit by retreating a second hex, but that's the limit. You can retreat. All other hits must be satisfied by step loss. So in this case, if the Germans had taken 4 hits, if they hadn't gotten the advantage of this defender artillery, they would have taken 4 hits, which would eliminate the unit because they could retreat 2, but only have 2 steps. So 2 hits would be for retreat, and 2 hits would then eliminate the unit. But in this case, they're going to survive. So they take their step loss there. He's now reduced to 1 step, but he's still an armor unit. And then he retreats. He's going to retreat 2 hexes. He's going to go. He's going to go to here. The Germans have their choice of direction as long as they don't enter a hex in an enemy zone of control. I should mention that every unit does have a zone of control, even when reduced and even when dispersed. And I mentioned dispersed because if you retreat 2 hexes, you must become dispersed. So I'm going to change his status to dispersed. He has a dispersed marker on him now. Dispersal doesn't affect zone of control, but it does mean if he's activated, the only thing he can do is remove the dispersal marker. So this is kind of like that unit's losing a turn, in addition to retreating and having lost a step. So that's the outcome for the German defender. And now the Soviets must lose a step based on getting this result from this chit. The first Soviet hit must be applied to either an armor unit or a large unit. He doesn't want to give up the large unit because it gives you 2 chit draws. So he's going to choose this armor unit with a strength of 3 and reduce it by 1 to a strength of 2. Now this guy, he changed from armor to a half track, which means he is no longer considered armor. He's still a vehicle and has a good movement allowance. But if he were to attack by himself, he wouldn't be considered armor. So now that the Soviets have taken their required hit, they can advance after combat, and the Germans retreated 2, so the Soviets, if they're mechanized, can advance 2. The infantry can advance only 1. So the infantry unit under here will do that. He'll go into there, and then the Soviet armor will advance 2. And the second hex of your advance can be in any direction as long as you don't move from Zok to Zok. So the Soviets have some options here, one of which is to move this guy 2 hexes to here. That's not Zok to Zok. He's entering a Zok, but he didn't come from a Zok. And doing so surrounds the other guy who's going to be attacked, which will be an advantage for the Soviets in the second attack. And the other mechanized units are going to advance up to here, like that. Oh, this infantry unit will also advance. Yeah, so that's allowed because even though there's a large unit, the 2 units together have 5 steps. You're allowed to have up to 6. I couldn't, for example, have this guy in there because that would be a total of 7 steps. So stack it like that. And that's the end of the first combat. So this combat tactic card the Germans played is discarded. We're still in the 3rd Tank Army activation, so we'll leave this card out here for now. All the combat chits that we played are now, they actually aren't discarded. They're just, there's a separate little window in the Vassal mod that holds the chits you've played. They don't go back into the cup right away. So now for the second combat, the Soviets are going to attack this guy here. And here they're going to also just depend on their artillery as a combat tactic. So the Soviets are attacking with this unit here, not the unit underneath because he's in a different army that's not activated, but the guy on top, this one. So he's got 3 steps, so that'll be 2 combat chits. Here we have 2 units for a combat chit each, and here we have another large unit. So that's 2 for this guy, 2 more for these 2, 2 more for this guy, and then 1 more for the artillery barrage that is automatic for the Soviets on the first 2 turns in this area. So that again is 7 combat chits, and the Soviet likes having 7 because it qualifies as a large attack. So the Germans are not going to spend another card now. They want to keep their cards. They're not going to play a combat tactic. The Soviets are going with their free combat tactic. And here's the first. So again, we draw two combat chits to start because this German defender has two steps. So the first one here says flank attack. An attack is a flank attack if you're attacking from at least two hexes that aren't adjacent to each other. And this qualifies because we have a guy attacking from this hex and a guy attacking from this hex, not adjacent to each other. So the flank attack would be a D1. The flip of this, just to show you what that says, is a one hex attack. So if the Soviets were attacking from only units stacked in just one hex, this would actually be to the defender's advantage. But that is not the case. It was a flank attack. This chit says Soviet air power. The Soviets did not play the air power combat tactic. They could have, but they did not. So this does not apply. This would have given a hit to the Germans. The flip of this says German air power. If the Germans had played air power, this would have been two hits against the Soviets. But this one does not apply. So we'll pull that over there. Then we're going to bring over our additional chits. All right, so the first one says equal to or greater than 4-1. Let's see, we had a strength of 4 in this hex, 8 in this hex, that's 12, of 4 in this hex, that's 16, against 3. So this is a 5-1. So the 4-1 applies. The flip on the 4-1 is 6-1. We don't have that. So the 4-1 applies. This one says attacker command 3, 4, or 5. That means if these guys were activated with a card that has a command value of 3 or higher, which is a high quality leadership, that will cause a hit to the defender. And this card here does have a command value of 3. So that chit qualifies. The back of it says if the attacker command was 1, which is a poor quality command, that would have been hit against the attacker. In this case, Soviets get to use this side of the chit. This one, this chit here says if the terrain is clear, the attacker takes a hit. And that is the case. The terrain here is clear. So, and the flip of this says if the defender was in city or woods, it would be a hit taken away from the defender, but that's not the case. So back to the clear side. And this chit is similar, except that it gives a hit to the defender if it's clear. So there's generally more bloodshed in clear terrain. And the flip of this one is a city town, does not apply. And the last chit is if it's less than 4-1 odds, the attacker takes a hit, but we were at 5-1 odds. The flip of this, if it was 9-1 odds or greater, which is a very powerful attack, this one would have given the defender 3 hits and removed 2 hits from the attacker, but that does not apply. So this is the net. This one says D4, 1, 2, 3, 4, A1. So that's 4 steps, or 4 hits rather, against the defender. I shouldn't have covered up the German unit. So the defender is eliminated because they have to satisfy 4 hits, and retreating 2 would satisfy 2, and then they'd have to eliminate 2 steps, which would eliminate the unit. Furthermore, he actually would have been eliminated on a D3 because if you retreat out of an enemy Zoc and through an enemy Zoc, you must take an additional step. So he's very much eliminated. The Soviets, when you eliminate a unit, can advance 2 hexes as long as the second hex isn't from Zoc to Zoc, enemy Zoc to Zoc, and it's only the mechanized units that can advance 2. We're going to advance this guy like that to kind of further pin this German unit. And then the infantry will go like that. Okay, so that was the first activation of the game, the 3rd Tank Army, and it's a big one. It's the largest Soviet formation, at least at the start of play. They had a pretty rousing success with that. Discarding that. So now it's the German turn. Now, for the first German impulse, they're looking at the situation here. Now, one thing they know, and the rules don't allow you to activate the same formation, two impulses in a row. So the Germans know that even though these guys over here had some success, they're not going to be able to be the next activation again on the Soviet side. They have a little time to react to that. The Germans are a little more concerned with this situation here because these guys are kind of almost trapped and there's some strong forces here. So the Germans are going to play for their first play this card, Core Rouse. Enlarging that, Core Rouse allows them to activate units that are kind of spread out. There's Core Rouse is spread out. They're here, here, and here, and they're also over here. So this card would allow all of those units to move. And so that's what the German player wants to do here. They're actually going to, let me zoom in, take a closer look, because they're going to do a combination of movement and placing improved positions. When you're activated, if you don't move, you can place an improved position on a unit which absorbs a hit in combat. So that can be a very good defensive move. Okay, so we have an IP on this guy. He's going to be asked to kind of delay the Soviets. We're going to move this guy out from the zone of control. You have to pay one extra to exit an enemy zone of control. And so the only place you can move is here because you cannot move Zoc to Zoc like that or like that. So he must move into here. So that costs a total of 3. And then he can move one more for 1. Does not cost any extra to enter a zone of control. So that's his first move. He's just trying to back out. And this guy, it cost him 2 to go here. The river doesn't cost infantry any additional. So that's 2. 3. And he's going to back out all the way to here because that will put him actually outside of that artillery barrage zone. So he's happy about that. And over here on the north edge, we're going to move these guys away to start a withdrawal, but we're going to leave. Now, let's leave the stronger guy forward to delay them more. We're going to leave him here with an IP. So, unit status, improve position. Okay, so the Germans did a combination of withdrawal and fortifying with IPs to create delaying forces and also to preserve other units. So that was their first turn. So we'll discard that card. Forgot to mention that when the Soviets ended their impulse, they drew up a card, so they now have 5 cards in hand again. The Germans had played a card as a combat tactic, that artillery card, and they just now played a card for a command. So they get to draw up 2 cards to fill up their hand. You fill up your hand at the end of your impulse, not the end of the opposing player's impulse. So that was the Germans' first impulse. So now it's back to the Soviets. Now the Soviets want to keep their offensive rolling, but they do want to be a little bit stronger. So they're going to play, they have this overall command card called Stavka, and they're going to play that. And the first command on that is deploy all Soviet reserves. So this would allow them to bring in every unit that's in their reserve box, really adding a lot of strength to their early attacks. So that's what they're going to do. And when you take a reserve, it has to be placed near units that are already on the map in the same formation. So this guy here is in the 40th Army, so he has to go be placed over near the only 40th Army units on the board at the moment, there will be many more coming, are here. So the rule is you have to be placed at least 3 hexes away from an enemy unit and in supply on a road or adjacent to a road and within 2 hexes of a unit in your formation. So he can't be placed here because that's within 2 of a German unit. He could be placed here because that's also 3 away from the German, but only 2 away from Soviet, so that's allowed. So that's where he's going to be placed. Right, he couldn't be placed, for example, here, because even though that's 3 away from a German, it's too far away from another unit in its own formation. So that's where that guy goes. The units that are of most interest to the Soviet are these units in Mobile Group Popov. They're going to go here. Now you'll notice that I'm only 2 away from a German unit, but if you're on a friendly map edge, that is allowed to be just 2 away. So that's where they're going. So they really add to the strength of this force here. And then this unit is part of the First Guards. And so he's going to go on a map edge hex. He'll just go up here. Okay, so that was my reserve placement for the Soviets. That's discarded. So now it's back to the Germans. And their next plan is to activate the guys that were just attacked. So they're going to play the 48th Panzer Corps card. Here it is. And that is these 3 units here. 1, 2, 3. And they're going to undisperse this guy. That's the only thing that he can do because he's dispersed. So we will remove marker. And then the other 2 are going to pull back for 2 reasons. 1, because they're in danger of being surrounded. And 2, because they want to get out of the that artillery barrage zone. And we're also concerned that there might be a hole developing. So we're going to go 1, 2, leaving a Zoc, 3, 4, 5, 6 with him. And with him, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we still have kind of a line here, and it's outside of the artillery barrage zone. So that was the German play for their impulse. So that's discarded. So now we're back to the Soviets. And now that they have brought in those reserves, they're feeling it's time to launch their second major attack. So they're going to play their card Mobile Group Popov, which are these units here. I'll zoom in on them, all in this area. Some of them are already kind of advanced across a bridgehead at the start of the game. So they have a lot of strength there. They would like to get rid of this annoying guy and, if possible, attack elsewhere. So they're going to go 1, 2, 3. They're activating to move. So he moves up to here. That armor pays 1, 2, 3, 4 total. There's a bridge over the minor river, so that's only 1. They can't get to the woods here, though, because if he wanted to do that, it would have been 1, 2, 3, and then it costs mechanized 3 to enter the forest and 1 to cross the minor river. So that would be 7. So he can't do that. So he's going there. And we'll also bring this guy over and this guy over. So they're all there. Now we could maybe have brought over someone here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, yes. So that's a better move to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can stack with any unit as long as you don't exceed the restrictions. And so that gives us 7, 12. That's pretty good. Then this guy, he has to leave the Zoc first. He goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And these 2, or this 1, he's not activated. This one comes up here. Okay, now, and these 2 guys here can't move because they're kind of trapped in Zocs right now, but killing this guy in the IP will relieve that problem. Okay, so that's the movement for Mobile Group Popov. And now they're going to attack. We'll take on this guy first. So he's a 3 in an IP. Even though he's surrounded, it doesn't, in this game, supply is determined at the start of the turn. If you're in supply at the start of the turn, you're in supply throughout the turn. So he's still considered in supply when resolving the combat. So here we have from our activated units, whoops, we have 11 points, 16 points, 20 points. So that's going to be a huge attack. And we're attacking with, in terms of chit draws, we'll get 2 for this unit. For these 2 units, we'll get 4 because they're both large. They're all large. So we're getting 8 chit draws plus the artillery barrage. So that's 9 chit draws there. So we're starting, we'll draw 2 first because that is the strength of the defending unit. Here he has 2 steps. So we draw 2 chits first. We're drawing 1, another 1, 2. So these are interesting for the first 2 chits. The first one says IP crossfire, and the German unit is in an improved position, an IP. So it does count. And the flip side was dispersed or unsupplied. The unit is not unsupplied, even though surrounded. So the IP crossfire counts. It'll be -1 to the German hits and +1 to the Soviet hits. But this one says A1D2, and it looks like it's going to count as well. Yes, it's not less than 4-1. It's definitely 5-1 or greater. We counted, what was it, 21? 20. So it's a 6-1. So that counts. So at the moment, the net here is a 2 against the Soviets. And S1 is always against the Soviets, and A1 is against the attacker. So that's 2 against the Soviets and only 1 against the defender, because this D2, there's a subtraction. So that's not a good start for the Soviets, but they're pretty confident because they get to draw, you said a total of 9, so they get to draw 7 more. So they will go ahead and do so. All right, oh, that's a nice stack. Okay. This one says large attack. D1 is definitely a large attack, but let's look at the flip as well. 7-1. Oh, we don't quite have 7-1. We're a 6-1. So the large attack does apply. Here's another large attack, an A1D1. Flip that, 5-1. And that has priority. So that's a little better for the Soviets because there's no attacker loss. Here's an attacker artillery. We know that applies because we have the barrage, and this is the priority side. Here's an 8-1, which we don't have. The flip on that is a 6-1. We do have that, so that applies. Defender adjacent. There is no defender adjacent to the German defender, so that does not apply. That would have helped the Germans. Flipping that, they're not dispersed or unsupplied, so that does not apply. Here's another 6-1. This looks like pretty deadly. Here's a 9-1. We don't have that, but we do. It's not less than 4-1. So our net is, let's see, for the defender, 1, 2, 3. -1 is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hits for the defender. So even though he has an IP which absorbs a hit, he's going to be dead. So we'll remove that and send him to the eliminated units box. Now our Soviet attackers, though, got an A1 here and an S1 here. So it's 2 hits. So even though we killed that guy, he did some damage. Now, as the attacker, you cannot retreat. You do have an option after you take the first hit to disrupt everyone, disperse everyone to absorb up to 2 hits. But they don't want to do that. They don't want to disperse and lose a turn. So they're going to take 2 hits. The first one has to be on an armor or a large unit, since they're all of that type. We'll take a step loss from this large unit. So now he only has 2 steps instead of 3. And we'll take 1 from this large unit here. Okay. And then we can advance. It's a 2x advance, but the first hex has to be the combat hex. So he'll go 1, 2. And this guy's going to stay where he is. I think we'll advance him to there just so he's not in a Zoc for more mobility. So that's the situation with that attack. Now, the other attack has this unit, only that unit. The other one in the stack does not participate. And these two units. So that's a total of 12. And let's see, we might want to play the Soviets were thinking of playing partisans, but you can only play that if they're in woods or cities. So we're not going to do that. So we have one, two chit draws, four chit draws because of the artillery barrage. We probably will play a combat tactic to improve our chances here. We're going to play assault coordination because what that allows us to do, assault coordination, we're playing this card instead of to activate 69th Armor, we're using it for assault coordination because that allows other units that aren't activated to participate in the attack. And there's this unit here. So that not only adds the unit strength to the attack, it adds the unit's chit draws to the attack. And whenever you play a combat tactic, you get a chit draw. So we suddenly went from drawing only 4 chits to drawing 7, because now we have in this stack a 3-stepper and a 2-stepper. So that's 3 chit draws. These two make it 5 chit draws. The artillery barrage is 6, and that we played assault coordination makes it 7. So now it's a large attack, a much more powerful attack. So now we're going to draw our combat chits. The defender has 2 steps. So is the defender in the city or woods? No. Is the defender in the clear or broken? Yes, in the clear. So that's an A1D1. Okay, is there another defender adjacent to the defender? There is not. And then this would apply if the defender was dispersed or unsupplied, but that's not the case. So this one does not apply. So now we're going to draw 5 more. Here's the 5. Okay, is it a flank attack? No, a flank attack has to be from at least 2 hexes not adjacent to each other, and that was not achieved. So the flip of that says 1 hex attack or in a city. It wasn't a 1 hex attack and it's not in a city, so that doesn't apply. Here's a 3-to-1. We definitely have a 3-to-1. What's on the flip of that? It's not less than 2-to-1. So our strength is 9 and 7 is 16. It's a 5-to-1. So this applies. Is it in a city? Support happens later in the game. So it's not in a city. And flipping it, it's in clear terrain. Oh, this is a bloody combat. Does the defender have armor? No, the defender is purely infantry. Does the attacker have armor? Yes, they do. So this applies. And then finally, was the attacker command value a 5? If we look at the activating card, it was a 3, so that does not apply. The flip is if the defender is dispersed or unsupplied, that does not apply. So the end result is a D4, D1, 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 D1 adds up to D4, and an A2. So we have eliminated the German unit. It can retreat 2, but then it has to take 2 hits, which would eliminate it. So it's gone. And our Soviets have to take 2 hits. So again, they don't want to disperse. They could take 1 hit and disperse all of them, but they don't want to do that. So they're gonna take some steps. So they're gonna take steps on these 2 units. Step loss for him, and step loss for him. Okay, and then they can all advance 2 hexes. So they're going to do that. It'll go there. Send one guy over to pin him, and then we'll put the other guy in here. Okay, so now the Soviets have created a hole in this area here. Zoom out and look at the strategic picture here. There's there's a hole in this area. So it's the German turn. The Germans want to deploy their reserves from the first SS. So they're going to play, I'm sorry, the second SS, Panzer Corps, not the first, which will allow them to bring in all four units they have in the reserve box into the game. It's similar to the rules regarding Soviet deployment. It has to be at least 3 away from a Soviet unit. It has to be on a road or a clear hex adjacent to a road that can trace German supply. So a road that's we call it a supply source because it can trace all the way back to it on roads to a German map edge. And it has to be within 3 of a unit in the same formation. Now, there are at the moment no second SS units on the board. So in that case, it has to be within 3 hexes of a unit in the same German army. And these units here are in the same German army as the units we're bringing in. We can't put a unit like here because you have to be 3 away from a Soviet. So we can't actually just plug the hole with these guys, but we can. I wanted to put one here, but that's 4 away from the nearest German unit. So that's not allowed. And oh, another factor is that there are deployment zones. If you look, there's these lines on the map that define in what general area of the map reserves need to be placed. In the case of 4th Panzer Army, which these guys are a part of, it has to be between this line and this line. So up near the frontier, that's between this line and this line. That only affects deployment of German units. It doesn't affect their movement once they're in play. The Soviets have similar restrictions for their 2 fronts. They're a little more restricted because a Soviet unit can't move outside of its front operation boundary. So the guys in the Voronezh front can't move south of this line, and the guys in the southwest front can't move north of this line. This area here with this stripe indicates units of both fronts can operate in that width. So back to our second SS deployment. We're going to put our first one here. And once you deploy one unit, it's in play and can facilitate the deployment of other units in the same deployment action, the same deployment command. So now we can put a unit here or here because it's within 3 of a unit in the same corps and 3 away from the Soviets and within the allowed band where they can be deployed. So we put those 2 guys there. We'll put another one here. And then our last one we'll put in Kharkov because even though it seems pretty far behind the lines, the Soviets can break out unexpectedly, and you don't want Kharkov undefended. So that's the German play for their impulse. So now the Soviets want to try to follow up on their breakthrough. They can't activate Popov again because they were just activated. They wish they had a card to activate these guys, but they don't. They do have a card to activate these guys, so that's who they're going to activate. This is to activate 6th Army, and there's 4 units in 6th Army here, here, and here. They're all going to move up and consider attacking if they can get enough strength to attack here. Now, these are all infantry units, these 2, this guy and this guy. So they ignore the minor river when they're moving. They do need to pay 2 for the forest, but it looks like they could all get there. So that's what we'll do. He's going there. He's going there. He's going there. And he's going there. Now, another thing they maybe like to have done was to go like in this direction, but they can't cross, they can't go north of this line. They have to operate south of that line. So they headed over here. Okay, so they're going to take on this unit here. He's a 3 strength unit with 2 steps, the German unit. The Soviet strength is 7. You don't count the Popov unit in this stack. And 5. So they're a total of 12. So it's a 4-1. They don't have any armor. They're not flanking. Oh, maybe they could have. They probably should have put someone over here because then it'd be a flank. So they would have been able to do that. They had a unit starting here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that at least flanks the defender. So they'll go with that. And the Soviets are looking over their cards. They're thinking, oh, this guy is just outside the artillery zone. So I think I'll play an artillery card to strengthen this attack. So that's what they're doing. This is called fixed artillery, which means it has to be within a certain number of hexes of this line in order to be played. Later in the game, it's not useful. So the Soviet attack has 4 units that each give 1 combat chit, and they played artillery, so they'll be drawing 5 combat chits maximum. They're going to start with 2 for the number of pips in the defender. Here's the first combat chit. Here's the second combat chit. We drew a 4-1, which is exactly the odds that let's see, the flip side was less than 3-1. That's not the case. And the defender doesn't have artillery. The attacker does. So right now, this is already a D2A1, but that doesn't kill him yet. So we get to draw 3 more chits. Oh, attacker command 3, 4, 5, but we're activated with this card, which is only a 2, not a very good command card, so that doesn't count. The flip side of this, attacker command 1. Well, we're not that bad, so this one just doesn't count. Okay. Town, woods, or broken. We're not in any of those terrain types. That would have helped the defender. And we're not in a city either, and the attack, again, support only matters later in the game. And then the last one is a 3-1, which does apply. The flip side of that was less than 2-1. That doesn't apply. So we have 3 hits to the defender, 1 to the attacker. So the German will survive. He can retreat here. You can retreat across a river if it's the only route possible. Otherwise, you go in a different direction. But in this case, he does that, and then he retreats to here. That would be required by the retreat priorities. Again, you can only go across a river to here if that was the only choice, but he has a choice to go here, so that's what he'll do. And then he has to satisfy the 3rd hit by taking a step loss. And because he retreated 2 hexes, he becomes dispersed. And then that allows the Soviets to advance, but all the participating units were infantry, so they can only advance 1 hex. So they'll do that. Things are getting pretty thin in this area. It's looking like we're going to need some more help. So the Germans, their next activation is going to be to activate 3rd Corps. 3rd Corps are these units in this area, the light gray with the red band. They're going to start heading over to the middle of the action here while keeping some defense in this area. This armor unit is going to disengage from the city here. He has to pay 1 extra to leave a Zoc, so it's 2 to there. Then 3, 4, 5, 6. The infantry is going to move into the city in its place. We continue to hold that. This guy is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this guy will stay where he is and build an IP. Now, the guy in the city here, he could stay, not the city, it's a town. It's worth a victory point, but he's about to be surrounded. And then once he's surrounded, it'll be difficult to get him out of there and he could be destroyed. So he's going to, discretion will be the better part of valor here. He will pull back to here. That costs him 3, 1 to leave the Zoc, 2 to enter the forest. And so he doesn't have enough movement points to go any further. But that prevents him from being surrounded. And he's still in the forest, which is pretty good defensive terrain. So now the Soviets have received another card for another command card for these guys over here, the 3rd Tank Army. So for their impulse, they're going to play that card. Here it is. And see what they can do with these guys. Okay, so this card says he could deploy the 3rd Tank Army reserves. He doesn't have any. He wants to use it for the 2nd command, which is activate all units in 3rd Tank Army. Cards also have a command to assign replacements. That's to build up units that have lost steps or to bring in eliminated units, but that doesn't start until game turn 3. There's also an event here, Partisan Uprising, which allows the Soviets to put dispersed markers on German units and cities. But if we were about to attack Kharkov, that would be a really good play, but we're not near Kharkov yet. So we'll use it instead to activate the whole 3rd Tank Army here, continue our advance. So this guy here will be pretty easy to take care of. He's already reduced and we can surround him. So we should also look at taking on something else. So we're actually going to pull this guy out here to here. One might be able to. No, we all right. 1, 2. Eight. Put him in there too. All right, we're going to move this guy around to here. And we're going to bring them into there. We're going to bring them into there. Okay, so we're doing 2 attacks here. The first one is very strong. We're not going to play any combat tactics for that. We'll be drawing a maximum of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 chits because we're in the artillery zone. The defender has only 1 step. We're not going to play any combat tactics to support this one. We are pretty confident. We start by drawing just 1 combat chit because the defender has only 1 step. And our first draw is a 4 to 1, which is 1 step. But that's enough to actually kill the unit because it has only 1 step. And to retreat, it would have to go Zoc to Zoc. So it would have to take an additional step for that. So 1 step was sufficient to kill the unit. So it's dead. And then we can advance. That's infantry. They'll advance 1. The mechanized units, he'll go there. He'll go there. This guy, we're going to leave where he is so he can go through this hole if he wants. Okay, then we have an attack against this unit. The Soviets have 9, 1, 2, 3 chit draws there and 3 chit draws there. That's 6. He's outside the artillery zone, so it's only 6 draws. I think we might add a combat tactic to that. So we're going to play intelligence. Intelligence will allow the Soviet player, after all chits are drawn, to remove one they don't like and replace it with a different one. If they remove one, and if they want to, they can replace it. They don't have to replace it. That's what intelligence does. And also that's going to give us 7 chit draws, which will qualify as a large attack. So it's a 3-1. We start by drawing 3 chits. Okay, so we're in clear terrain, so that looks good. Just check the flip side. City town does not apply. Clear terrain does. It is not a 1-hex attack. The defender's not in a city. Unfortunately, it's not a flank attack, so this does not apply. The defender does not have artillery, but neither does the attacker. So far, it's only a D1, and we've drawn 3 chits, so we get to draw 4 more. We'll draw them all. 8-1, we don't have an 8-1. Flipping that, don't have a 6-1 either, so that doesn't help. Less than 4-1. Ooh, it is less than 4-1. We only have 3-1, so that's going to be a hit against the attacker. All right, 2 more. Artillery again. No one has artillery, so that doesn't help. And attacker command 3, 4, 5. We are good with this. Yes, that's an attacker command 3. So that one does count. The flip side said attacker command 1. Okay. So this is the end result. It's a D2A1. Now, since we played the intelligence tactic, we can get rid of a chit. So we would like to get rid of the A1. The question is, do we want to replace it with something else? Sure. We'll take a chance. Let's see what we got. 8-1, no. Less than 3-1. No, we do have 3-1, so this one doesn't count. So no harm, no foul there. So it was a D2. So in this case, the Germans have some options. They have a 3-step unit. They could retreat 2 and become dispersed and lose no steps. They could retreat 1 and lose 1 step, or they could hold their ground and lose 2 steps. Getting near the end of the day. So I say that because if you're dispersed, all dispersal comes off at the end of the game turn. So they might take the risk, but they don't want to create a hole here just in case the Soviets can move again. So they're just going to go 1 and remove 1 step. There you go. And if you retreat 1, you don't become dispersed. So that's how a typical game might start. I hope that's been a good overview of how the game systems work. I wanted to move ahead to a point later in the game so you could see what the game looks like after the Soviets have been rolling for a while. You know, the Soviets have moved forward some. They haven't gotten a breakout yet, but there's still a couple more impulses in turn 1. What we're going to look at now is a typical situation in the middle of turn 4, which is about 10 days later. Every game turn represents 3 days of time. Okay, so we've put up the game map as it might appear in the middle of turn 4. You can see that the Soviets have taken large swaths of the map. The southwest front line is now out here. They've even taken Dnipropetrovsk, which is quite a feat. And the Voronezh front has already taken Kharkov and has moved beyond and is surrounded part of the 2nd SS Corps. The Germans are just starting to rebuild down here at the west edge of the map and have actually surrounded the Soviets in Dnipropetrovsk. They have a pretty good screen of the line, the Germans do here, so that they're preventing the Soviets at the moment from getting to the south edge, because if they get to the south edge, they get a lot of VPs for cutting off the Germans that are further south of this action. The Soviets have 20 victory points at the moment, actually 21 victory points at the moment. If they were to get to 26 by the end of this turn, it would be a strategic victory and the game's over. So it's hanging in the balance. So I'm just going to pick up the action as if, because we're kind of in the middle of a turn here. Wanted to point out that there's lots of these little Soviet control markers in towns on the map that they've taken. That's a play aid to help keep track of that. So I'm going to zoom in to this area of the map because what the cards in the Soviet hand, the Soviet player has selected the 6th Army card here, which is these units in this area. Now, I want to show you that the Sixth Army has gained some mechanized units, so they're a lot more powerful, and they're going to try to take on this German armor unit in an improved position in broken terrain. A bit of a challenge, but we'll see what they can do. So we're activating Sixth Army, and that there's one Sixth Army unit that's not yet adjacent to the German unit, so that unit will move up to here. This will then give the Soviets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chit draws, and they're going to play a combat tactic, combat engineers here. Here comes the combat engineers. Combat engineers give them an extra strength point and remove an IP before the combat. So this comes off. Too bad, so sad. Before the Soviet attack, the Germans got an opportunity to play a combat card, so they're kind of miffed. So they're going to play a card called Screen. Now, Screen reduces the number of combat chits drawn by 2. So the Soviets were going to draw 7 because they played a combat tactic, 6 for their units and 1 for the tactic. But now instead of 7, it will only be 5 combat chits. That means it won't be a large attack. We'll start drawing the chits, and here are the first 2. Speak of the devil, here's a large attack, which doesn't count because the most they'll be able to draw is 5. So that will not be counting. The back side of it said 7-1, and that's not the case. So the 7-1 doesn't count, and the large attack doesn't count. We'll put that aside. There is no artillery because even though we're in the barrage zone, it's turn 4, and that doesn't apply anymore. Neither side played an artillery card. So neither of the first 2 chits count. So the Soviets can draw a total of 5. So they can draw 3 more. Here, there's a 3-1. NKVD is a tactic, but the Soviets didn't play it. That's 3-1 counts. The 4-1 would apply. 6-1 is not the case. And flank attack, it is a flank attack. It's not a 1 hex attack. There are Soviets attacking from at least 2 non-adjacent hexes. So all 3 of those count. It was a comeback for the Soviets. So the defender result is a D3. The German unit will survive. It can retreat 2 and take a step. So it does so. Goes here and here and loses a step. And because it retreated 2, it becomes dispersed. Okay, the Soviets incurred an A1 result in the attack, so they have to reduce either an armor unit or a large unit. So they don't have any large units, so it'll have to be one of their armor units. So they'll flip this guy to its reduced side, and then they can advance. So they have an opportunity here because they pushed this guy back and he had to go back 2. This guy can advance 2, and now they've surrounded the German unit in this victory point city. So that'll be really helpful in taking that in the subsequent activation. The other mechanized unit will advance 2 to here, and these infantry units will advance like that. So that was an effective attack. So this shows you the effect of some additional tactics like the combat engineers removing an IP and the screen reducing the effectiveness of the Soviet attack. Okay, so following that Soviet activation, the Germans are going to activate the first SS to move. The Germans have a lot of options here because you'll notice down here in the reserve units box here in this area, there's a lot of units they could bring in. But right now they're most concerned with trying to salvage something in this northwestern part of the map. They have a guy here in danger of being surrounded. They have 3 units they deployed already from the 2nd SS Corps. So they're activating them. Here's the card play. Activate all units in 2nd SS Panzer Corps. They're going to move one of these guys. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the other one they're going to bring to here, and that'll keep their brethren from getting surrounded. They're going to keep this guy in Poltava because that's a victory point city and there's some Soviet units approaching it. So that was the Germans starting to set up a line deep back here. So then it's the Soviets' next turn. So the Soviets are going to continue what they were doing in the east here by attacking that city they just surrounded. The Soviets are going to activate First Guards Army to assault the city, was just surrounded. So they're going to play First Guards Army to activate these two stacks and attack the city here. They've already got their units in place, so they don't need to do any movement. They have 3 units there for 3 chit draws, 1 unit here for 1 chit draw, and then they're going to play assault coordination, and that allows them to include other units adjacent to the city. And that includes the fellow who just advanced there here. So they're going to, and that's a good add because it also not only gives them strength, it gives them an armor in the attack. So now they're attacking with an additional unit, and they get also an additional draw for playing a combat tactic. So now their number of draws will be 3 for these guys, 4, 5, and then 6 for the cards. So they'd be drawing 6 chits then. Let's pull some chits. So the German defender in the city has 2 steps. So the attack begins by drawing 2 chits. I'll put them out here. All right, so the first one says city or attack not supported, and the defender is in a city, so that's a D-1. So that's not a good start. The flip side said clear terrain. That's not the case. So it's a D-, so we start with a -1 hit to the defender, and then the next chit is for artillery. No one used artillery, so that one doesn't count. So then we get 4 more draws for the Soviets. All right, so looking at what we got here, the first one is air power, Soviet or German, there is none. The next one is a 5-1. I don't think we have 5-1. Yes, we have 16, so that, and the defender is only a 3, so the 5-1 does count. The flip side said less than 4-1, okay. And another 5-1, that's very lucky. And then the last one says defender dispersed or unsupplied. That's not the case. Or defender adjacent. In this case, there is a German unit adjacent to the defender right there. So that counts. So we have 4 chits that count. D2 and D1 would be a D3. However, there's a D-1 and a D-1, so it's only a D1. And furthermore, if you're in a city or a town, the number of hits is reduced by 1. So the result for the defender is a D0. Nothing happens. The attacker, on the other hand, takes 2 hits. It's an A2 result. So the attacker has to either take 1 hit and disperse all the attackers, including the guy that participated via the assault coordination, or take 2 hits. And yeah, it didn't work out too well for the guy who participated via assault coordination because the first hit must be taken and must go to armor or a large unit, which he is, so he has to take the first hit. So he loses some steps for being helpful. And then the Soviets don't want to disrupt, so they'll take another hit off this little guy. Okay, now the Germans want to finish doing some protection down here in the northwest corner. They're going to play a card to activate any one unit. So this is a card that normally be used to activate core routes. Where you're going to use this activate any one unit command to activate this guy here and move him over towards the city. He has to pay 1 extra to leave a Zoc. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He goes there. And that blocks the way to the city. That's the German impulse. The Soviets are going to play a card to bring in some reserve units. The Soviets want to strengthen the attack on the city next time. So they're going to play this First Guards card that allows them to bring in First Guard Army reserves. That's the first command on the card. And bring in the unit from the reserve box. And he has to be 3 away. They'll put him here, and then he'll walk over there. Okay, so that card play was just that a command to deploy that unit. Now the Germans are concerned about this area around here. So they're going to deploy reserves over here, and they have the third corps has, I think, 5 units in the reserve box. So they're going to play this card to bring in these units here. It consists of a panzer division, 3 regiments of a panzer division, and infantry regiments. You'll notice one of the infantry regiments is reduced. It had earlier been brought back from the eliminated units box via a replacement command and put into the reserve box, and now it's being brought in with the other units. You recall the German units need to be placed within 3 hexes of a unit in the same corps, and there's several locations where that applies, where this attack occurred earlier, and then also in this area. So they're going, and we also have this unit up here. So they're going to use the infantry up in this area to reinforce. The units have to be placed either on a road or in a clear X adjacent to a road that leads off a friendly map edge. This whole edge is German friendly, all the way down here. So any road that leads off the edge, they can place it along that road. We put this unit here. It couldn't go here because that's not adjacent to a road. Here and here. And then the Panzer Division, we're going to start to create a counterattack force in this area. All of these are within 3 of a German unit and at least 3 away from a Soviet unit. We'll stack these guys together here, and they can maybe do some damage. Okay. Discarding that, showing how the Germans are starting to build up some forces to counterattack. Things are still desperate here on the west map edge, but in the reserve units box, the Germans have 2 panzer divisions they hope to bring in before the end of this turn to shore things up. Yeah, so that's how the game plays. And also you can see how kind of dramatic the advances can be early in the game. It's a game that the Soviets can win early, but if they don't, the Germans can win late. So it's one of the dynamics of the gameplay. Thanks for watching, and hope you can pick up the game from Compass. As I said, it comes out in mid-June.